only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
You found your way to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thanks for joining us today. Visit online wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. Wealth of information at both sites. Our program here dedicated to looking at things from both a biblical and a historical perspective. Most of our programs dealing with issues right here in the United States, but often looking at how timeless principles of liberty affect people around the world. And David, today our topic is going to take us to the Middle East and our fellow Christians who are not only being persecuted, but literally being run out of town and facing either death or do it our way.
You know, one of the doctrines that goes with Christianity, there's a couple here that come into play. One is in Acts 7, it talks about how that God lays out the boundaries for nations. It's God that establishes the boundaries for nations. It's not a global community in that sense. There are individual identities, and he establishes times and places of nations. At the same time, there is and has been for centuries in the Christian church the Apostles' Creed, which talks about how they were all part of the Catholic Church, a small c, Catholic meaning the universal church. And so while God has placed Christians in different specific nations across the world, there is also the body of universal Christians, not the large C, the Roman Catholic Church, but the small c, Christians of all denominations, all backgrounds. And so while we have to respect national identities, we also look at the Christian church that is, according to the New Testament, the bride of Christ. That is his complement. That is what he's returning for. And boy, what's going on outside of the United States is fairly unbelievable right now. Some parts of the world where that Christianity has been going strong since the Apostle Paul preached in those areas, now about to be eradicated. There literally were more Christians martyred last year than in history before that. I mean, it's amazing how fast this has escalated. And of course, this is not much of interest to most of the secular news. You have to be listening to some type of conservative or Christian news program to hear what's happening with persecution of Christians across the world. It is just not an issue for secular thinking folks. So most folks are not aware of what's out there. And we thought, it'd be good to kind of look at the Catholic Church, small c, across the world and see what the situation is right now. And a guy who's been right on top of this, been really working for trying to reduce the persecution of Christians across the world is Tony Perkins at FRC. And he's going to kind of bring us up to date on what's happening in that part of the world where, since the Apostle Paul, you literally have had churches established that are still going today.
When we return, Tony Perkins with us here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Crime is one of America's most serious problems today. Its effects reach not only the direct victims of its violence, but even those who have not been attacked. The concern for crime has not been limited to this century, however. Our founding fathers were also concerned about it. Yet the effects of crime unquestionably were much less in their generation. So what was their deterrent to crime? Signer of the Constitution, James McHenry, answered that question. He explained, "The Holy Scriptures can alone secure to society order and peace. In vain, without the Bible, we increase penal laws and draw protections around our institutions. Bibles are strong defenses. Where they abound, men cannot pursue wicked courses." Founding Father James McHenry believed that widely teaching the Bible was the best means to deter crime.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to the intersection of faith and politics. WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thanks for staying with us today. With us now, our good friend Tony Perkins from Family Research Council. Tony, always good to have you, bro. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks, guys. Good to be with you.
Well, wish it was some good news today, but unfortunately, it looks like we're seeing almost the wipeout of Christians in Iraq.
Yeah, it is. It's very disturbing, and the Obama administration is just silent on this. And, you know, we got to keep this in context, Rick, because this is an area of the country, or the world, rather. You go back, it goes all the way back to the beginning of Christianity. And in fact, it was two of Jesus' own disciples that took the gospel into this region. It's been there consistently from that time. But now it's being driven out by these radical Islamists.
I didn't realize that Mosul was such an old Christian community and that it was one of the larger Christian populations in the Middle East.
Yeah, certain parts of Iraq have been the longest consistent Christian communities in the world. The gospel went there, it remained, and you've had these Christian communities. Even during Saddam Hussein, you had relatively peaceful situations for the Christians. In fact, before 2003, when the Iraq War began, there were about 1.5 million Christians in the country. Today, that is somewhere between maybe 250 to 300,000 in the entire country.
Are they leaving? Are they being literally taken out? What's happened?
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, we've seen since the United States pulled out of Iraq, the increasing persecution of Christians, and a lot of Christians have fled the country. But with the ISIS moving in, even a more radical strain of Islam, they have sent in Mosul in particular, what's transpired there is they've said, all right, here's your choice. You convert to Islam, you leave, or you pay an impoverishing tax, or you die. That's your options. And so people are leaving, but in the wake of that, I mean, they're pillaging, they're raping, they're killing. It's really a travesty. In fact, this meets the definition of genocide. Going back to, I think it was 1948, where there was, we signed as a party to a treaty to prohibit genocide. That's what's happening there. We saw this back in the Clinton administration in Rwanda, where they didn't say anything about it. In fact, had to apologize after the fact because 1 million people were killed. That's what's happening here. America is silent, and future generations, and maybe not that far from now, will have to apologize, and it'll be shameful that America stood by and watched.
What has been, I mean, in this case, Obama administration just out to lunch on this? Are they purposely not wanting to bring attention back to Iraq? What do you think they're thinking?
Well, Rick, I'll have to tell you, I don't say this lightly, and it's taken me a while to come to this point, but there's a pattern that is emerging in this administration. We've seen it when Christians have been persecuted in Muslim countries. Pastor Saeed Abedini, who has been in prison for almost 2 years in Iraq, or in Iran, rather, and very little, if anything, has been said or done to secure his release. And he's an American citizen. And then, of course, we just saw a positive resolution on the situation with the wife of an American, Miriam Ibrahim, but it really wasn't because of the Obama administration. It was actually because of the public outcry and international outcry that she was released. They were silent on that. I think that this administration is more concerned about offending Muslim countries than they are of upholding a long-standing tradition of defending religious freedom, in particular Christianity.
A complete reversal of long-standing American values. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Tony Perkins is our guest from Family Research Council. Stay with us here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently overturned the jury sentence of a man convicted of the brutal murder of a 71-year-old woman because the prosecuting attorney had mentioned a Bible verse in the courtroom. Yet consider what happened in the 1778 case, Respublica versus John Roberts. Thomas McKean, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, was the Chief Justice of that court, and addressing John Roberts after the jury had sentenced him to death for treason, McKean told him, "You will probably have but a short time to live. Before you launch into eternity, it behooves you to repent of your evil deeds, to be incessant in prayers to the great and merciful God to forgive your manifold transgressions and sins, to teach you to rely upon the merit and passion of a dear Redeemer. This prominent founding father actually delivered a salvation message to the defendant in the courtroom.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Tony Perkins with us from Family Research Council, talking about the abysmal situation in Iraq and the eradication of Christians in Mosul, the deadly ultimatum that they have been given to either convert to Islam or face death. Just the things that are happening. It really, what an example of Tony, the difference between living in a Christian nation where we allow people of any faith to live, and there's no forcing you to adopt a religion at the sword. What they're doing there in Mosul and unfortunately across Iraq now is that's the difference. I mean, to be forced to adopt a particular religion, I mean, we don't realize how good we've got it in a nation that allows such freedom.
Right. All religions are not the same. Christianity allows freedom, choice. No one is forced to participate or be a part of the religion. We understand that can't happen. That's not the way it occurs. You don't bring faith by the sword. Islam is not the same way. But here's the very concerning thing about this, Rick, is that as we turn a blind eye to religious persecution abroad, it will only lead to greater intolerance toward religion here at home, in particular Christianity. So we have not only an obligation, but I think a deep-seated responsibility to speak out against this persecution of Christians and others. And by the way, our country has a long history of defending religious freedom, not just for Christians. I mean, we go back about 2 decades ago, where we were involved in Bosnia and other places. That was on behalf of Muslims.
Yeah.
We went to defend them. So we have a long record of defending people who are subjected to tyrants, despots. I mean, you go back to FDR's For Freedom speech back in World War II. I mean, the reason we got involved in Europe was because people were being oppressed, and religious freedom was one of those components. That's being lost. It's a fundamental ideal that America has long upheld, and we're turning our back on it.
Let me ask you from a practical point, Tony. So a lot of people might say, well, we're just war-weary. We don't want to do anything back in Iraq. Aren't there lots of things we could do in situations like this that don't involve us going back in with troops? Absolutely. I mean, for one, you can denounce it, but we're hearing very little about it. I mean, this is, again, genocide. Now, I think the reason they're not wanting to use the term genocide is because, although it is, if you use that term, we're obligated by treaty to stop it. So I think they're wanting to not use that terminology, but they're silent completely. And then there's the female circumcisions that reportedly are going on under ISIS, forcing women. And it's a horrible thing that they're doing. It's really torture. It's brutal. But nothing is being said. You want to talk about a war on women? Well, it's happening right now in Iraq, and Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi are silent because they're preoccupied with their phony war on women that they've created for their own political purposes. Yeah. And then just power of the purse, right? I mean, we give money to these countries. I mean, can't we it seems like used to we had sort of a moral standard, and we would not give, or we would withhold if we saw things like this, but it just doesn't seem to bother this administration.
Well, I don't think we're providing money. I know we're not providing money to ISIS in the Islamic portions of Iraq. Of course, now they have everything they want. They've looted the banks. They've taken the equipment that we left behind, and so they have everything they need. In fact, they are a well-stocked, well-financed initiative. They're not just a band of terrorists. They're a well-formed army that is well supplied and well funded, and we should take them very serious.
Well, and let me be more specific. I mean, with the Iraqi government saying, "Why aren't you doing something about this? If you want us to continue to give you money and support you, this needs to be at the top of your list."
Yeah, it should. But we can also, for instance, in the north, you've got the Kurds. We can be supportive of them and use them kind of as a buffer, and just provide training and supplies to some of them to kind of contain these radical Islamist forces. But Rick, there's no real simple answer to this, because it's a quagmire that has resulted in an administration that for the last 5.5 years has been out to lunch when it comes to basically everything, except their key agenda items. And it's interesting. You go back to Robert Gates, the Secretary of Defense, and his tell-all book that he wrote. When he was talking about Barack Obama, the president, and his engagement in foreign policy and defense issues, is the only time he saw him engaged and animated was when he was wanting to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Wow.
This president has a radical social agenda, and that's all he cares about. I mean, we're concerned about appointing LGBT ambassadors. We've got 6 of those, and we're pushing this gay agenda across the world in countries that are highly offended by it. In fact, in working with this situation with Miriam Ibrahim, I have met with Sudanese officials to try to put pressure and facilitate her release. And it was interesting. They told me that the only real communication they have with the State Department is pressuring them to adopt these pro-homosexual policies, which are an anathema to them in an Islamic country. And so while they can advocate for that, they have no time for religious freedom.
Wow. It's a staggering list of priorities. I mean, distortion of priorities, I should say. I mean, it's amazing what they will focus on versus the real things, the real moral dilemmas that are happening across the country. Tony, God bless you for what you do, man. I tell you what, Christians across the nation need to be thankful for the fact that we have advocates like you involved in these fights and boots on the ground. Most people don't pay attention to what's going on, and we so need you guys. Family Research Council website that we can send people to.
Rick, it's frc.org, pretty straightforward, and we appreciate you and David and all that WallBuilders do. You're a great resource for the Christian community, and we're grateful for you.
frc.org. Go there and find out more today. Tony Perkins, God bless you, bro. Thanks for coming on today.
Have a great day.
Back in a moment with David Barton. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. Thanks to Tony Perkins for joining us as well. David, I'm reminded we did a program, I guess maybe 3 months ago, with Johnny Moore from Liberty University on this subject as well. This is something Christians really in the U.S. have to pay attention to and begin to hold our government accountable to help alleviate out there.
It's hard to hold them accountable if you don't know what's going on. And so knowledge is the first thing toward taking action, getting right knowledge. But there is clearly, as Tony said, there is a pattern emerging with this administration. And as he said, they're more concerned with defending Muslim countries than they are defending religious liberties. But it's even more than that. As I look at foreign affairs, all right, what action have we taken on North Korea? What are we doing with Israel? Well, we're certainly trying to whack Israel. How about Russia? Well, we're bluster and make a lot of noise. Ukraine, we told them, hey, if you'll give up your nuclear weapons, we'll defend you from Russia. Well, that didn't work out too well for Ukraine. What about Iran and Egypt and Libya and Syria? Now, we did jump into those. We were happy to help with Egypt and Libya and Syria, not Iran. We're leaving that alone. So we seem to be silent and inactive on the world scene, but if we can do something to help move the Muslim Brotherhood forward, now we'll do that in a heartbeat. We will bomb Libya. We'll help you with Syria. We'll do what it takes to get things done in Egypt. So if we're promoting Muslim Brotherhood, we seem to be pretty quick on this. Anything else, even not related to religious liberties, just on world crisis, we don't seem to want to touch anything. As Tony said, this is an administration that's been out to lunch on basically everything. A great example is we literally had, for years, we have had a religious liberty ambassador, a part of the State Department, and that it is his job to do nothing but look out and fight for religious liberties across the world. And it doesn't have to be just Christians. It can be persecuted Hindus. It can be, as talked about in Bosnia, even persecuted Muslims. But that spot has remained unfilled in the Obama administration. I haven't got the most recent update, but it's been unfilled for years. He hasn't even put someone in there. And as Tony said, what can we do? Well, at least America could denounce it. We could at least speak out and say something, but we're not even doing that. And when he said that, I started thinking about, there is a sin of silence. I mean, to do nothing is a serious sin. And what I was struck with and what I looked up real quick was the account in Numbers 20, verses 9 through 12. And in that account, you've got Israel, who's now been delivered out of slavery in Egypt. They're on their way to the Promised Land, and on their way there, they run out of water. And so they murmur and they complain and they say things against God for all the hardship they have, and eventually they turn to God for help. So God tells Moses two things. He says, Moses, speak to that rock before their eyes, and it'll pour out its water for them to have something to drink. And then Moses, I want you and Aaron to go gather the people together in a large assembly. And so Moses and Aaron gather them together, and as Moses and Aaron standing before them, Moses just, he looks at them and he just explodes. And according to the Bible verse, it says, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? It's like, I've had it with you guys. And when he said that, he committed a profound sin, because God brought water out of the rock. It wasn't any we. It wasn't Moses and God. It wasn't Moses and Aaron. It wasn't Moses. It was God. And so Moses said, must we bring water out of the rock like Moses could do that? So for making that egregious sin, God tells Moses, okay, you knew better than that. You're not going to the Promised Land. You and I aren't on the same level. And then he turns to Aaron and says, and by the way, Aaron, you're not going to the Promised Land either. Why? What did I say? Absolutely nothing. You stood there beside Moses when he said what he did, and you didn't say a single thing to contradict him, to correct him, or to do anything. And so, because of your silence, you're not going to the Promised Land either. And I think people think that by being silent, they avoid controversy, they avoid whatever. But God holds you accountable for silence. And I started looking in Ezekiel 3, verses 16 through 21, God makes it really clear that if you're silent and bad stuff happens, you're going to be held accountable for that bad stuff.
Man, we need to hear this. I'm sorry, David, to interrupt you, but I'm just thinking how bad we need to hear this. Keep going. I just want to amen you.
Yeah, well, Leviticus 5:1 talks about the sin of silence. Proverbs 24:11-12 says that if someone's headed down a wrong path and we remain silent, then we're going to be held accountable before God. I mean, think of all these verses where God says, if you keep your mouth shut, I'm going to take the sin and impute it to you. How about that, America? How about keeping your mouth shut on religious persecution? Guess what? God says, you know what? I'm going to lay that sin at your feet. You could have said something. Now, God makes it really clear. If you say something and it still doesn't change, you're at least off the hook. For your side, you tried to do something. You at least spoke out. And even if they keep the persecution going, you're off the hook because you did something. But to do nothing and to remain silent, that's a double whammy. And by the way, let me get just real personal here for Christians. We're in a culture now where that if you speak out and say something is true or that this is moral or immoral, you'll get your brains beaten. So what do? We remain silent. And by remaining silent, we let people keep doing things that harm themselves spiritually and physically. And, well, I can't say anything. I'll get called all sorts of names. I don't want to create a problem at work. I don't want to create a problem in church. We remain silent. And God's really clear. If you keep your mouth shut when something wrong is going down, you're going to be held accountable because you didn't say anything. And so, when Tony said that, it really hit me. And that sin of silence is what so many Christians right now are suffering from. Now, we'll complain to each other, but we won't get out and confront sin. We won't get out and say something about it. We're happy to talk to each other inside the four walls of the church where nobody's going to tear us up or yell at us. But that's what America's doing right now. It's being silent at a time when its voice could make a difference. And even if it didn't make a difference, at least it's off the hook with God and we're not accountable. But at this point, by our silence, we will be held accountable for what's going on. And as Tony pointed out, we've had an 85% loss of Christians in Iraq over the last decade, from 1.5 million down to 250,000. 85% reduction, 84% reduction in Christians, and we've been silent over this. God's not happy.
Yeah, it's time to speak up, and it begins with us. As you said, getting educated. We've got to know what's happening. We've got to know just how bad it is. Hopefully, it's going to move people to action. One of the things we love about our audience is they are people of action.
Yeah, that's right.
When you pick up the phones, make the calls. Let's do the things that it takes to raise awareness on this. And, David, I guess the best pressure points, is it the calls to Congress? I don't think Obama's going to listen on this.
Well, start writing letters to editors. Start getting on your Facebook. Start doing blogs. Everybody's got a platform now. Use that platform.
In your own church. Be a voice
in your own church. Absolutely. Yeah. People don't know this is going on. You make them aware of it. You be the one to speak up if the president won't.
You've been listening to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting.